Well, hello everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're located. I'd like to extend my welcome, Alan Ewing, CBRS Alliance Executive Director. Thank you for joining us, something that we've been doing now for quite some time during our members meetings, what we refer to as OnGo 101, also known as CBRS 101, but OnGo, of course, is our branding, so it seems very appropriate to speak of ourselves in those terms. What we have today is a pretty interesting group of or set of information for you from technical, certification, marketing, and also our SaaS admins. So go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So as noted here, this is a great way to orient and educate our members, give them also potential members. We have some folks that are pondering joining the Alliance. This is a great way to give you some information as well. One of the things that you will notice is there is a questions function in the GoToWebinar. So you'll see that over on the control panel. If you do have a question during the session today, please feel free to type it in. I will curate the questions. We may not get to all the questions today. We will try. If we have questions left over that we do not are not able to answer in person, what we will do is include a text answer with the recording of this webinar and the presentation materials online when we upload all the information. So your questions will be answered. It just may not be answered during the live call. We will capture those and give a text answer at least. Next slide, please. So just an overview of the agenda today. I will do a quick welcome and overview of the Alliance and OnGo as a technology. Dr. Gary Baduro, who is our Technical Working Group Chair, will give an update about what's going on in the technical side of our work. Jörg Brackenziek and Amkar from the the Test and Certification Working Group will give an update there as well, some overview and some information we think you'll find useful and may intrigue you a bit. And then we have sort of the feature of our 101 sessions, the SaaS admin panel. We've been doing this now several times, and it's really worked out well. We have representatives from the different SaaS admins. I have a few questions teed up, but of course your questions interesting as well for us. So when we get there, be ready with some interesting questions. And then we'll wrap up with the marketing 2020 and beyond from our marketing director, Oren Binder. Anytime we have left for questions, we will definitely work on answering questions. So just make sure to type those in. If we don't get to them today, as I mentioned, we will answer them in text. Next slide. Go ahead and go to the next slide as well. So very quickly, and a lot of this is very much review for many of you, but we are an industry forum. We're an industry association that's really here primarily to champion 3GPP technologies in this band, the CBRS band. Those, of course, governed by the rules under FCC Part 96. If you are interested in learning about all the gory details of Part 96, you can look at those yourselves. We have a link here. The formal title is Title 47, Chapter 1, Volume 5, Part 96, but you'll hear it referred to, obviously, for brevity's sake, as Part 96. There's also an interesting webinar from our partner organization, Win Forum, and that's about understanding this band. This is a webinar from June 2015, but it is still very relevant today to give you some foundational information if you'd like to learn more. Next slide. So just a brief history. Really everything kicked off in 2010 when the NTIA identified this band for potential sharing. The FCC then did work 2012, 2014 to finalize the rules, to do the rulemaking, etc., to bring this into existence. The Alliance itself was formed in mid-2016, and again, very focused on the 3.5 gigahertz band and 3GPP-based technologies in the band. In 2018, we launched the OnGo brand and our certification program. And then we began the baseline coexistence specifications and also developing other specifications that are very important for our joint work. In 2019, this is when things became real. The groundwork with the NTIA, the DoD, the FCC, et cetera, and our initial commercial deployment launch. Full commercial service was launched at the beginning of this year, and we are working diligently as we speak. And I'm sure Gary will give you a little sampling of this, but we are diligently working to bring 5G into the portfolio of technologies we support here at the Alliance. The other thing that is on everybody's mind, of course, is the PAL auction. That is going on right now, is wrapping up or in the process of wrapping up. We'll see how all that proceeds, and once we have some more details, we'll be sharing those as we can. Next slide. So again, Part 96, this is really what this is all about. As I mentioned, we have a partner organization in Wind Forum, Wireless Innovation Forum. We work with them closely. Wind Forum approaches this from a technology agnostic perspective, and we, of course, build on that with LTE, 5G, and R in the band. Next slide. So a little bit about how these two fit together, and again, keeping in mind, Wireless Innovation Forum is a more general, has a more general charter than the Alliance does. But among the activities they are engaged in is helping define the architecture of the SAS, making sure the rulemaking in coordination with the FCC is done well, and the testing is done well. They're also the basis for the conformance testing under Part 96 so that equipment can be authorized. We take what has been done by Wireless Innovation Forum and build on it. We go technology specific in the band, so LTE and 5G is our main charter. That's really the thing to keep in mind here, is we're all about the 3GPP based technologies. Next slide. So just a really quick, and again, most of you know this very well, but it's always helpful to ground us. So the band we're speaking, of course, is the 3.55 to 3.7 gigahertz. You see the three-tiered sharing rubric that we've been operating in. The top tier, of course, with the incumbents, the military, the ship-based radar, the ground-based radar, the fixed satellite stations. WISPs for the moment as they transition from Part 90 to Part 96. Those are the incumbents. And then, of course, what we are doing from the commercialization side of things, the next two tiers, the PAL, these are the licenses that are in the process of being auctioned as we speak and are being wrapped up as we speak. And then GAA, which encompasses the entire band. So this is the sharing of the band with the incumbents, with the PAL license holders. What you see is there's always access for GAA in this. The PAL licenses, there's up to 7 licenses in 10 megahertz channels. And those are done by county. If you'd like to learn more about the PAL, there's a lot of information. The PAL auction, there's a lot of information out there about that, and happy to direct you that way. There's also some information on our public website about that. Next slide. Not quite finally, but just to give you a sense of the organization of the Alliance, and again, many of you are aware of this, but there are 5 primary working groups under the leadership organization. These are the marketing working group. You'll hear from Oren a little bit later. Gary Boudreau from the technical working group will be talking to us in just a moment. Our test and certification working group also be speaking today. And then our other 2 groups are ecosystem focused, business working group and deployment and operations working group. One simple way of thinking about these, business is looking at the verticals, deployment and operation looking at the horizontal interactions between the verticals. So things like roaming, neutral host, etc. So a lot of good work going in all of these groups. You will hear from 3 of them today. Next slide, which I believe is my last slide. It's a little bit about the OnGo brand. So this is our brand name. This is branding the LTE and 5G and R technologies in the CBRS band. So talk about OnGo when you're talking about 3GPP based techs in the CBRS band. CBRS as a name is really descriptive of the band itself and the rulemaking from the FCC. We go specific on the technology that we deploy in the band, and that's where OnGo really takes over. Next slide. With that, I meant to get through this fairly quickly because I think the more interesting presentations follow me, frankly. And with that, I'd like to introduce Dr. Gary Boudreau of Ericsson, who is also our our technical working group chair. So if you go to the next slide, and Gary, if you're ready to take it away, I'll let you have it.
Thank you, Alan. So today, what we intend to do is give a quick overview, a flavor of the work that the technical working group has been undertaking this year, with a focus on our release 4 content, building on our release 3 content. And we'll give a quick overview of that, and then some details in some of the areas that we're studying and what we intend to standardize and complete as part of the specification development process this year. So next chart, please. So this, and I don't expect you to read through and understand all the details, but this is on our website. We have a page that captures the details of what the plan, what essentially the plans of the features that we have put in place to study this year. So we have WIDs, our work item descriptions. So these are definitions of features we intend to standardize this year. And if you see the term SID, that's a study item. So these are areas where we don't have perhaps a clearer view of some of the potential features, but there's an awareness that we need to look into these a bit more. And generally, the output of a study item will be a technical report with a series of recommendations that may move into a work item. If you look at the bottom here on this one, an inter-CXM exchange, that was the case. We had a study item earlier this year, and the output of that we have moved to a work item to standardize and capture in the specifications that content. And as I said, if you're interested, if you remember and interested in more details, if you go to this click on this link or go to this link within the CBRS Alliance website, you'll be able to download, look at any of these documents for more details. Next chart, please. So this gives a high-level overview in terms of the context of where we are today in terms of release 3 and moving to release 4. It's fairly high level, but for those of you who've been involved, as you may recall, release 3 was published, completed at the end of last year and published early this year in Q1. And the main focus was on standardizing within CBRS Alliance 5G functionality, or an initial instantiation of 5G functionality that would allow it, the 3GPP NR technology, to be deployed within the OnGo ecosystem. So this included things like alignment with the standardization of band 48 within 3GPP. We've had support for various timing, synchronization, and alignment of TDD configurations with the existing 3GPP LT configurations that we've defined in the previous releases. There were a framework was put in place for the GA channel assignments, as well as protocol extensions in terms of how the CBSDs communicated with the CXM, which is the coexistence manager, to support the 5G NR functionality. We also defined some more flexible use of TDD configurations, including indoor TDD configurations, mentioned the protocol extensions. We've also, in release 3, defined extensions for authentication support, both in terms of NR as well as credentials management. And in addition, we defined also a framework to allow roaming in shared home network identifiers, as well as IMS-based roaming capabilities for the shared home network as well. And finally, local breakout, a local breakout framework was defined in release 3. So in release 4, we're essentially focused on extending those capabilities in terms of the 5G functionality for NR. We've been looking at aspects of PAL coexistence and PAL channel mapping. Of course, this is within the Part 96 framework that Alan mentioned, referred to, And most of the requirements for PALs, of course, will be defined in the Part 96 requirements as well as within WinForum. But in the CBRS Alliance perspective, we've been looking at ways that perhaps we can build on those existing requirements and that would benefit the coexistence framework within OnGo. We've also been specifying enhanced support for NRTD configurations, and I'll provide some more details on some of these. Potential support for additional UTRA carrier configurations, additions to the information exchange protocol to support communications between different coexistence managers. We're defining what we're calling OnGo SAS profiles, which I'll provide a little bit more detail on as well as support for both standalone public networks for NR as well as non-public network support. And as part of that, we are defining an alignment with the 3GPP standards, and particularly release 16 for home network identifier support for the non-public networks. Also looking at adding to the UE profiles that we have defined in previous releases for further support for NR. Next slide, please. So in terms of PAL coexistence, this is a work item. We're looking at coordination of TDD configurations among different PAL networks, and to try and create a framework where we'd have mutual impacts between PAL to PAL deployments and from a coexistence perspective, as well as GA to GA coexistence impacts when PALs are deployed, and how to coordinate between PAL and GA TDD configurations. So that's the main focus of that activity. In terms of PAL channel mapping, we had a study where we looked at a number of aspects of the impacts of PAL channel mapping. Of course, this is a function that is specified in Part 96 in the WinForum, but we have liaised with WinForum in terms of some of the aspects that we believe are important for the OnGo ecosystem. And as it turns out, most of our recommendations coming out of this study are in fact aligned with the thinking, and there's some good synergy there. Next chart, please. In terms of the coexistence time, CDG, release for content.
Gary, we're losing your audio just a little bit. It's like you're fading out just a hair.
Okay. Is this better?
Much better, yes.
Okay. So we're defining enhanced support for NR-TDD configurations. So this includes support for, in release 3, NR was defined almost exclusively for a subcarrier spacing of 30 kilohertz, and we are extending that to 15 kilohertz and potentially other subcarrier spacings as well. We've defined a framework for equivalent and aligned TDD configurations for the different numerologies, both between NR to NR deployments that may use different, for example, subcarrier spacings, as well as NR to LTE deployments. And so this is all under the notion of a flexible TDD configuration. We've also, as I mentioned, studied support for enhanced carrier configurations. So this includes potentially NR carrier aggregation deployments, dual connectivity, as well as the notion of dynamic spectrum sharing. For those of you who are familiar with 3GPP, this is not quite the same as what we're doing in Part 96. So in the 3GPP context, this would be, for example, an operator who has spectrum that they're deploying LTE in, and the 3GPP standard has defined a framework by which they could also share that spectrum with NR functionality. So this is sort of a refinement or nuance in terms of deployments that an operator may have within the CBRS band, and they want to share between LTE and NR within their own network. And so the focus on this is to ensure that we have all the hooks in place within the CBRS band to support that if operators so choose. And finally, there's some additional NR standalone functionality that's being defined within 3GPP. So we're looking to ensure that's aligned with as well. Next chart, please. In terms of support for multiple coexistence managers, we're defining a framework for information exchange. So this includes procedures that the CXMs would follow to generate information to be shared with their peer coexistence managers. And this includes generating common TDD configurations, and we're using this notion of connected sets to quantify potential interference between different users and base stations, CBSDs. And it also includes a framework on how to assign TDD configurations between peer coexistence managers to ensure proper coexistence and minimize interference. And as part of that, we've defined enhancements to the protocol information message exchange to support that framework. In terms of OnGo SAS profiles, so this is the notion that within WinForm, of course, there's defined functionality that SASs have to support, and that's all part of the release 1, and SASs have been certified to support that functionality. In WinForm, they're moving to a release 2 feature support, and the majority of the features in release 2 are optional and in general do not require additional certification of the SASs or CBSDs. And some of these features, for example, could include things as supporting grouping of base stations to create what we could call a coexistence group, to where base stations could mitigate interference among themselves. There's enhanced antenna patterns. For example, 2-dimensional antenna patterns could be supported. Various protocol enhancements. So some of these features are optional. And so from an OnGo perspective, we felt it is important that operators and vendors, they're working with a SAS, would understand which of those optional features are supported by a given SAS and which are not. So as part of this, we're defining SAS profiles targeting different use cases. We're working closely with the business working group and deployment operations work group to define that. So for example, we're looking at mobile broadband, fixed access, industrial IoT, or for example, some of the use cases that we're defining OnGo SAS profiles for, and the expectation is this would be a living capability that we could add additional use cases going forward as required. The intention is to specify this in a new technical specification document, and that'll be part of the release 4 content. Next chart, please. So in terms of the network services task group, as I mentioned in the overview, they've been focusing quite a bit on extending the definition of the framework to support NR standalone public networks. And part of the activity here is to identify gaps in the CBRS specifications in release 3 relative to what's being defined in 3GPP release 15 and as well as 16 going forward. And as part of our philosophy is to try and maximize reuse of what's in 3GPP, and where there's gaps to put those additional framework requirements within the CBRS Alliance documents. Also, again, support for non-public networks. Again, we're aligning with what's in 3GPP, so this includes both LTE and standalone NR non-public network specifications and use cases. Private network identifier scenarios are being supported. Interworking between the non-public network for 5G as well as the LTE non-standalone, for example, dual connectivity with the 12 packet core support. We are also, as I mentioned, actively updating our home network identifier specifications in terms of how those are assigned to align with what's being defined in 3GPP as a NR network identifier. And we've added additional capabilities for AKA-based authentication as well. Next chart, please. So additional support for the non-public network capabilities that we're also looking at are enhancements for various scenarios. I mentioned the PNI non-public networks. Other use cases include private network, shared HNI, and dual connectivity, which I had mentioned briefly. Additional UE profile support and support for the interworking. The UE profile enhancements, there's an ongoing study to look at some potential UE capabilities, and this includes for LT and 5G NR non-standalone operation, for NR standalone public network operation, as well as NR standalone non-public network operation. So depending on the outcome of that study, we may move this into a work item to specify some additional UE profile requirements in the release 4 specifications. Next chart, please. So in terms of timelines, as I mentioned, we completed the release 3 content at the end of last year. That went through an IPR review phase, and those specifications have now been published. We have a couple of dot releases in release 3. Those are focused on aligning some of particularly the messaging protocols between the SAS or the CXM and the CBSDs to ensure that new content as it's being defined in release 4, the messaging is backward compatible with the previous specifications. So our timeline in terms of defining the content is to have that completed by the end of Q3, by the end of September, and we're allowing a 3-month period, Q4, to go through the ballot review process for comments and updates to the specifications. We're fairly confident that we'll be able to hit this timeline. This is consistent with what we achieved in release 3. So it's a very similar plan, and as a matter of fact, a number of the work items we expect to have recommended text coming out of the meetings this week a bit in advance. So we're still fairly confident we're tracking to have draft specifications in place by the end of Q3. So I will stop there, Alan, so we can move to the next speaker.
Very good, thanks, Gary. And if you have questions for Gary, please type them into the questions panel. We'll work on getting to those either live or after the sessions today. Thanks, Gary. Appreciate it. Next slide, and slide after, I think. So now I am pleased to introduce Omkar I was practicing Omkar Dharmadhikari. There we go. And Dr. Jorg Brakenziek, who are representing our test and certification working group to give us an update on the CERT program. So Omkar, take it away, please.
Thank you, Alan. Hello and good morning, everyone. Me and Jorg will provide a high-level overview of the OnGo certification with regards to the certification scope, test strategy, test plan, and overall process for OnGo certification. Next slide, please. So the current slide shows a high-level network architecture of the nodes that directly interface with the unit under test, which is either the Citizens Broadband Radio Service device, also known as CBSD, or the domain proxy, also known as DP. As part of OnGo Release 1 certification, we certify either a CBSD or a pair of DP and CBSD. DP is an optional element, but if implemented, it must adhere to the Part 96 compliance, similar to a standalone CBSD. The key thing to remember is that the DP and CBSD are always certified as a pair. We do not certify a standalone CBSD. CBSD can be a Cat-A CBSD with max CIRP of 30 dBm per 10 MHz, a Cat-B CBSD with a max CIRP of 47 dBm per 10 MHz, or a CPE CBSD, which is a fixed stationary CBSD used as a customer premise equipment. The certification scope for Release 2 will be enhanced to include CXM as a unit under test. A CXM is a logical entity which can be hosted within the SAS to manage the spectrum sharing among CBSDs. Next slide, please. So the release 1 OnGo certification consists of two aspects. The first aspect is the functional testing that demonstrates compliance to rules governing the connection and interaction between SAS CBSD protocol and functionalities implemented in the CBSD or domain proxy developed by WinForum adhering to FCC requirements. This part of the testing uses the WinForum implemented test harness that simulates SAS to exercise SAS CBSD interface and control the unit under test. The SAS test harness validates all required parameters are provided in the various messages. In addition, all the parameters and its values, whether required or optional, included in the message conforms to the proper format and acceptable range. The second aspect is the performance testing that demonstrates compliance with RF requirements and limits including max CRP, emission mass, peak to average power ratio, etc., and testing the CBSD RF interface towards the end user device to validate that the unit under test transmits within the grant parameters received from the SAS and ceases transmission within requisite time upon triggering of certain events. This part of testing also requires a spectrum analyzer capable of monitoring the RF interface of the unit under test. This can be either a radiated or a conducted type of testing. Another type of testing that is not included here is the interoperability testing that validates the interoperability between the components developed by different vendors compliant to WinForum requirements. This is outside the scope of certification, but is included as part of the interop events conducted by CBRS Alliance. Next slide, please. So this slide, the OnGo release 1 only uses the WinForum release 1 test plan that does the protocol conformance testing of the SAS CBSD interface with regards to registration, spectrum inquiry, grant, heartbeat, etc. There are overall 55 test cases for OnGo release 1, including mandatory, optional, and conditional test cases. The release 2 certification will also include a CBRS Alliance specific test plan that includes additional features specific to CBRS Alliance specifications and include functional requirement testing and protocol level conformance testing between the CBSD and CXM and the ability of the CBSD to broadcast the necessary CBRS identifiers. So just to explain the stack on the right-hand side, the compliance to FCC Part 96 is the basis of WinForum Release 1 that needs to be followed. WinForum adds an air interface agnostic layer to on top of the to ensure FCC compliance, while CBRS Alliance is focused on 3GPP air interfaces. Next slide. So this slide goes over the step-by-step procedure of how one would go about getting their devices OnGo certified. The vendor who should be a CBRS Alliance member submits a certification request on a dedicated web page available for initiating a certification request. The vendor then selects an ATL of their choice that can perform the necessary testing. Before certifying the device under OnGo, the device should be FCC certified and receive an FCC ID. The certification can be done together using the same ATL as well. After the ATL has completed the necessary testing, ATL will create a test report with the test results and upload it to the database. The CBRS Alliance Certification Board will review the results and reach out to the respective ATLs in case of any discrepancies or if additional information is required. If everything seems to be good, the certification board approves the OnGo certification application. Once approved, the certification by the certification board, the CBRS Alliance publishes the certification status on the CBRS Alliance website. I'll now hand it over to York to go over the rest of the slide.
Okay, great. So Josh, should go to the next slide. Okay, so there are three different types of certifications OnGo is allowing you to go through. The first one on the left is the initial certification. So that process you will use the first time you're certifying a new product. It's very similar with the FCC side, what you see there, this original equipment. It typically requires full testing of your device and the necessary test report to be provided. So once you have completed your initial certification and you do further updates to your device, for example, you're doing a software update, you can use the engineering change order process, which is shown in the middle. So it always applies to an already certified device. And it's very similar to what you know on the FCC side as permits the changes, mainly class 2 and class 3. It, in most cases, requires full retesting, but it may also just be sufficient to do partial retesting of the functionality, which you actually have changed. So if you do a change to your coexistent part of the software stack, you will certainly need to retest the entire coexistent stack. So if you do a change to your antenna configuration, you may only need to do limited testing, or you may not need to do any testing and just inform the CBRS Alliance about the changes you have applied. And the third certification type we are working under is rebranding. This is for vendors who are reselling already certified devices under different brand. So it's basically just putting a different logo on top and different package on top. But otherwise, there is no change to the device. This is very similar to what you have on the FCC side as change in identification. No retesting is required for rebranding. It is basically a pure paper process. If you go to the next slide. As already mentioned in the past, so Gary mentioned that release 1 and release 2 of the CBRS Alliance specification are focused on EU to LTE interfaces. And from a test and certification perspective, we only certify LTE interfaces. But we understand that some of our members are also supporting NR radio, and they would like to utilize or make use of NR radio even under release 1. So in order to support this, the test and certification program has added a dedicated 5G ready statement. It is not a certification of 5G capabilities, because 5G and NR coexistence will only become available from release 3 onwards. So therefore, we are not certifying readiness for 5G, but we only allow a statement that for vendors they can use that their implementation, their equipment is ready for 5G. The way we handle this from a certification perspective is we require a vendor to sign a dedicated additional declaration of compliance statement, where the vendor declares that they're supporting specific specifications, 3GPP specifications, which are 5G and NR specific. We are currently finalizing this, and it will be available soon. Should go to the next slide. Okay, I would like to give you some updates on actually how our numbers, how we are doing from a certification perspective. Till today, we have certified 38 OnGo certified device. We have 38 OnGo certified devices. These are CBSDs and CBSD domain proxies, and it's a quite healthy linear growth. As you can see, there are spikes here and there, but in general, we have a very healthy growth over the years. For those who are interested to get an understanding of how it looks like on the end user devices side, if you go to the next slide, Omkar mentioned already that we don't certify end user devices. So therefore, we can't provide you end-user OnGo numbers for those, but we are tracking the authorization side from the FCC to get an understanding of the depth of the ecosystem for the end-user device side. What you see here is the graph of developments of the end-user device side over the time, and that as of today, we are standing at 92 authorized end-user devices which received authorization to operate in the CBRS band. And there are many kind of devices you're doing this. So there you see smartphones, tablets, portable devices, a lot of modules, and routers. If you go to the next slide, this gives you an overview of where we are and what we are planning to do at the moment. I mentioned the OnGo release 1 certification that is active. We're actively certifying devices. We are currently working on preparing our test and certification program to also support release 2 certification. By doing so, we will look at additional requirements which have been added to the release 2 specification. We particularly looking into adding additional interfaces, like the interface to the coexistence manager. And we also looking into how to tackle the different network services use cases which have been developed within the technical work group, and looking at providing dedicated declaration statements so that vendors are able to say that their devices are, for example, ready for neutral host deployments. This will become available beginning of 2021. As mentioned, we are currently working on finishing the necessary tests and test cases and processes. We're also planning for an interoperability event towards the end of the year. After that, the plan is definitely go forward with release 3 certifications to include then 5G and coexistence requirements, and this will come as soon as we are finished up with release 2. And that's all from a test and certification perspective. And I guess we're going to the next slide and the next presenter.
Thank you, Jörg and Amkar, very much. Good presentations on that. And again, we have been fielding a few questions. So if you do have questions and we can answer them text, I'm happy to do so, but we will collect a few as well toward the end. Next up for us today is something everybody enjoys a great deal. This is our SaaS admin panel. I am happy to introduce our SaaS admin panel representatives. We're very fortunate to have one from all 5 approved SaaS admins today. So if my panel would enable your cameras, I'll introduce you all. So we have Gautam Gupta from Amdocs. We have Naotaka Sato from Sony. We have Mark Gibson from CommScope, Andy Clegg from Google, Kevin Hansen from Google, and Masood Olfat from Federated. Masood's batting cleanup here, I see, so we're in good shape. And my Google phone, Andy, just decided to recognize something that I said because I said Google one too many times and was answering a question for me. So it was being very helpful. Thanks everybody for you guys joining me as representatives on this panel. About half an hour, and I encourage some questions from the audience as well if we can get to. But start off, and I'll throw this open to the entire panel. From a high level, from your perspective, how is the deployment going? How are things developing from the SaaS admin's perspective? Masood, maybe I'll start with you and work our way through the panel here. Oh, you're muted, Masood.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
okay. Good. Thank you, Alan. I appreciate all your effort, and I think this is great. I think this is a very wonderful opportunity for the SaaS admins to provide some insight and the progress report. So obviously, everybody knows that the official commercial deployment started this year, and despite the COVID issue, we have seen a significant rise in the deployment, and we are so happy and proud that CBRS is getting a lot of momentum, and the deployment in rise. I mean, as Federated as one of the SaaS admins who have been approved, and also ESC admins, we have seen significant rise in the deployment. Multiple vendors, multiple operators, both from MNO and MSOs are deploying in this band, and we have a very good view and hope that this band could be successful. Thank you.
Very good, thanks, Masood. Sato-san, anything you would like to point out as far as how the development and deployments is going?
Actually, my name is Naotaka Sato from Sony Corporation, and thank you very much for the invite this session. And first of all, we have got approval from FCC on January. After that, we start the commercial deployment. As you know, that we meet the COVID issues. So currently, we are stopping the deployment right now. So, but for our SaaS point of view, we are developing the release to we form release to spec right now to start to implement it, and we try to ready to commercialization after the PAL auction is done. That is currently we are planning. So currently that we are just hold. If of course if operator requested, we can work with your operators. But currently that we are don't have any requests, so that's why we are just stopping, and we are start concentrating to developing our SaaS right now.
Understood. Thank you, Sato-san.
Thank you.
throw it to our friends at Google. How are things looking from your guys' perspective?
Yeah, things are going great. It's been, just as Masood mentioned, it's been really great to see the ecosystem develop since things went live earlier this year. And I would say we're really seeing both the traditional network deployers go big with CBRS, but we're also seeing a lot of wireless internet service providers use it as well. And I think now we're even starting to see the private market take it up more. So utility companies are starting to deploy it, or companies that want coverage on their campus, other private enterprises. So it's really exciting to see that third pillar. And a couple other interesting things that we've noticed is that recently we've seen educational users use it for schools to deliver connectivity to students who are going to be needing to do remote work right now due to COVID. And so just to be honest, I didn't think that we would see so many use cases that are really like beneficial to connectivity in the United States. So it's super exciting. And I would say if I had to say anything that is negative or interesting of what we did, it's due to COVID, I think we're seeing less category A devices deployed than we thought. So, so less indoor radios are being deployed, which makes a lot of sense because people aren't indoors a lot right now. But really exciting to see, like I mentioned, some of the educational some of the educational use cases and other things that are happening out there.
Yeah, and that's interesting you say that, Kevin. One of the things I've been doing is talking with a lot of our members. I think I've had conversations in the last month and a half with over 100 of our members, and that pivot towards education is pronounced. It's what's on everybody's mind. So that's good to see it's matching that. Got him. How about from Amdoc's perspective? Anything interesting that you're seeing as well from the deployments?
Yeah, so I think this year has been really interesting. I think CBRS really came out from behind the shadows to be real, with ICDs culminating and the FCC granting approval for commercial operations. I think particularly for the CBRS spectrum, it's been great going. We definitely see that the market evolving. We do see a lot of movement in the areas for utilities and also for WISPs. And they seem to be gravitating more towards this band than perhaps others. So it's been quite interesting. Also, we are seeing that sometimes our customers require a lot of handholding in terms of getting them through the process of onboarding their devices, having somebody available to just pick up the phone and talk to, and try and get your stuff resolved. It's been quite interesting that way.
Yeah. Mark, we don't see you on screen, but I assume you're there. From CommScope's perspective, anything to add? Do we have Mark still? We may have lost Mark. So,
Alan, I'm sorry, just one thing.
No, I'm here.
Oh, there's Mark.
I'm here. Sorry. No, this was double muted. I'll go ahead with what Masood was going to say. I missed the beginning of it. I got caught on a phone call, so I apologize, but I'm here now.
No, just one quick comment, which is not specific to Federated, and I'm just mentioning that because the PAL license has started last week, we have seen significant interest. I think we can go through the more detail later on, but we have seen significant interest in the PAL license, which started on July 23rd last week, and we are hoping that the conclusion of the PAL license would significantly add to the CBRS ecosystem as well. So,
good deal. Mark, anything that we're talking about how the deployments are progressing? From your guys' perspective at CommScope, anything in particular interesting from these early days of deployments from the SAS?
Yeah, what's interesting is the dearth of Category A. I mean, there's like a couple orders of magnitude fewer Cat A's, which is now, I guess maybe that's not surprising. What's surprising is the total amount. So there's been a whopping amount of outdoor deployments, or at least Cat B deployments, and not a ton of Cat A's. And I wonder, maybe we'll see that tick up as the auctions conclude and more people are looking at deploying, indoors. But I'm just that number I was kind of surprised to see that. Otherwise, the deployment numbers are going up, steadily. And I think, as Masood said, the auction is surprising people. I haven't checked today just yet, but the last I looked, the auction was at $455 million. So almost $456 million with about 1,800 counties, I'm sorry, 1,100 counties where there is activity. So that seems to be surprising everybody. And there are a lot of comments around the specific counties that are of interest, which tend to be some of the smaller ones. So that's surprising in terms of the counties where there's a lot of activity. So what CBRS has done is kind of surprise people that think they know this band, myself included. So I think these are all good things, and we're looking forward to seeing where the auction ends up.
Yeah, good deal. That's interesting you say that, Mark. That's a good segue. So, you know, with the auction in the process, I guess we're somewhere in the middle of it wrapping up. We're in the middle of the beginning of the end, I think is maybe a horrible way of saying it. But from your guys' perspective, are there any special preparations that are needed post-PAL to make sure that we're in a good position from the SAS admin's perspective? And I'll start with our friends at Google first.
Well, we still have a software. Yeah. Oh, so go for it, Andy.
No, go ahead, Kevin.
I was going to say we'll have an update that we will be pushing in the coming month that will allow PAL owners to be able to declare PPAs to protect where they will be deploying, and then in the future we'll also enable people to transact and have secondary markets and be able to take pieces of their PAL that they're not using and then offer it up to someone else who wants protection in a specific area.
Mm-hmm. Andy?
Yeah. The only thing I would add is on that secondary markets item, the FCC has designed their first ever what they call light touch leasing process that will, after some initial setup, make it very easy for people to lease their spectrum if they own a PAL, and it all for people who don't own a PAL to lease spectrum from a PAL holder if that PAL holder is willing. And the FCC is putting together a process to make that very easy and something that can be done within a SAS. We are still waiting to get the details of that process from the FCC. The SAS administrators have a meeting with them coming up in September. That was the fastest they could do it. We'll learn a lot more details about that process, but it looks like a very exciting thing to really speed the way to.
Got it. Andy, you dropped out there just a little bit, so I'll move on. Gautam, from the post-PAL world, anything you'd like to add in?
Yeah, I think some of us are on the same page. We will have a new release coming up later on this year, partly to take care of PAL. Also looking at all the PAL protections, not just the larger, but the smaller areas. So that could be interesting. Also, the way the PAL auction is going, like Mark mentioned, I think we will see a lot of new verticals coming up here, and then people wanting to grab spectrum and wanting to use PAL. The other thing that I think the industry is still missing out is the fact that besides PAL, you still have a lot of spectrum on GAA available, and it's not that if somebody missed out on the PAL licensing and they only have the subleasing, they still have the GAA spectrum to look at.
Good point. Very good point. Sato-san, anything, you mentioned earlier that, the post-PAL is very important from your perspective. Is there any special preparations that are needed from your perspective with the SAS admins?
Yeah, actually, Andy already said about the secondary market. So currently, all SAS admin approved as a release one, WinForum release one, SAS is using the normal PAL licenses, but PAL leasing is the separate certifications required from FCC. So actually, we are start discussing with the FCC, and we try to, I think all SAS admin try to implement the PAL leasing kind of the mechanism to the SAS. So maybe that is one of the exciting after the PAL auctions happen. Yeah.
Understood. So as a segue, Masood, talking about release 1 is where we've been, moving into release 2 from WinForum requirements. How is this going to impact implementations? What is this going to mean for us in general going to release 2?
Are you referring purely for a PAL or in general?
In general. in general. But PAL, you know, as you see.
Thank you. Sure. So let me first add one more thing to everything that my friends Kevin, Gautam, and Sato-san and Andy mentioned. Obviously, everything that from a PPA protection and PPA generation without leasing has been addressed in release 1. I think this is addressing your question as well. So again, the protection aspect of the PPA and also the creation of the PPA and dealing with the license itself using a WinForum-based database, it has been addressed in release 1. However, what is needed in addition to what we have done in release 1 test and certification, and also in release 2, number 1, as our friends all mentioned, is dealing with the leasing and disaggregation, the selling of the PAL licenses. I think our friends mentioned the detail. The second aspect that we need to deal with is and SaaS admins are diligently these days are working on, is the assignment of the primary PAL channels to the licenses. Everybody knows that the PAL license in FCC is basically the people bidding on the license, not the specific channel. And the SaaS administrators right now are working offline to identify the primary PAL channel post auction. This is the kind of the third aspect in addition to release 1 and the PAL leasing. And of course, there is a fourth aspect that relates on the increasing the performance of PAL in terms of the PAL coexistence and all aspects related to coexistence. So that's related to PAL. But in general, the release 2 WinForum, and I appreciate other friends' input as well. In release 2, what we are looking at some of the features that would impact mainly the performance of the CBRS, and we are categorizing that into 2 groups. There are some group of features that we are calling them non-regulatory impacting NRI, and some features that we are calling them regulatory impacting or RI. And the features which potentially impacts the Part 96 and the result of release 1 testing, we call them NRI, but for right now, RI. Right now, our main focus is some of the mainly NRI features that improve the performance of the SaaS operation and also CBRS, including features like using the more advanced antenna characteristic, features like grouping that enhance the coexistence functionality, and some features like that. And of course, we are gonna move to some regulatory impacting features. And and by we, I mean SaaS admins and WinForum, we are in discussion with the FCC to handle the certification aspect of those. But WinForum and CBRS Alliance is specifically focused on 4G and LTE, but WinForum in general, we are moving toward the implementation of the features, and also to address the interoperability between release 1 and release 2, and also within release 2, we have implemented a very kind of delicate feature capability exchange process among SaaSes and among CBSE. So things are going very well, and people are looking at implementing those.
Very good. Thanks, Masood. Mark, adding to that, you know, the release 2 transition. Can you hear me, Mark?
No, you went out for a minute.
Oh, sorry about that. So yeah, talking about the transition to release 2 requirements from WinForum. You know, anything specific from the SaaS admins that's being addressed here to make sure that the transition goes smoothly?
Well, you know, in addition to what Masood said, I think we're really mindful of making sure the transition is seamless. And you know, that does not necessarily have to incur any more certification requirements. And so we're looking at trying to you know, and you know, this is both WinForum and CBRS Alliance, to make sure that we address a lot of what Masood was saying from a technical perspective, but I just think from a general business perspective, from the standpoint of the SaaSes, make sure that the transition is seamless and smooth, and is, you know, is not noticeable to anybody. accept ourselves, which we have to implement. So that's kind of what we're really focused on in addition to the technical stuff.
Deal. Open it to Google or Amdocs or Sony. Any specific things on release 2 from the WinForm requirements that are impacting the way we work, or things that we should be aware of?
So, Alan, hopefully you can hear me. My internet's a bit wonky, but the only thing I'll say, release 2 is where we get to innovate. I think we'll be putting in new features and new capabilities, and it'll be pretty exciting once we get past the release 1.
Gotcha. Thanks, Andy.
Yeah, I agree with Andy, because on release 2, there's CBSD communicating with SAS and the exchange capabilities. So that's I think really the fundamental block where both SASs and CBSD vendors can then innovate, figure out new features and functions without really impacting that device usage with other SASs.
Yeah. Very good. So we've been getting.
So I don't have any additional things.
Please. Oh, okay. Thank you, Seth. We've been getting a few questions from our audience. So I'll tee up one of those questions and just open it to the panel. So would you give us an update on implementing the CX manager on GAA? Anyone want to tackle that one?
Yeah, so just wanted to, on behalf of Federated Wireless, and of course our other friends can chime in. Yes, of course we are looking at diligently implementing the GAA coexistence procedure, and for the time being, it is mainly focused on the GAA. Of course, PAL is not there yet. And based upon the decisions that the technology makes, and also the kind of proprietary to the SAS, we are going to enhance that to the PAL coexistence as well. And of course, work is going on to make sure that the result of those coexistence that we do does not necessarily conflicts with the result of potentially other SAS admins. So that work is going on, and discussions are going on among SAS admins. But we have been diligently looking at the GAA coexistence, and we have been implementing this.
Anyone like to add on? Okay, I'll pick out the next question here. To what extent will OnGo test the LTE functionality of an eNode B device? Is it fair to say that OnGo certifies? Okay, so that's more of a certification question that we can handle with our cert team. Their own independent. So yeah, it looks like we got a couple of certification questions. So I'll skip back to my question. Sorry about that. A little change in gear here. So looking down the road now, I know we've talked about release 2, we've talked about coexistence manager. From each of your perspectives, what are the biggest challenges that you think will be before us for the rest of 2020 and beyond? So we'll start with Google, and I'll, at least on my screen, I'll work across. So Kevin, Andy, what's the biggest challenges for 2020 and beyond?
I think we're all in this CBRS journey together, and we're learning what's easy and what's still to be defined, and when the rubber meets the road, so to speak. And so I think the most open-ended thing and the most interesting thing right now are the PAL auctions. So those are happening, and we're not exactly sure when they're going to wrap up, and then we need to implement them and then implement secondary markets. And so I think there's a lot of open questions around how are people with PAL channels going to be able to use GAA channels at the same time, et cetera. And so I think there's a lot of work for all of us to come up with a solution that works for our customers.
Gotcha. Anything to add, Andy? Nope, he's good. Gautam, how about from Amdoc's perspective? What is the biggest challenge for the rest of 2020 and beyond?
Yeah, I think PAL definitely, yes. Managing smooth transitions with PAL, trying to meet customer expectations, and also meeting all the compliances as well. But what we also see with PAL is with all these companies buying licenses and subleasing as well, we expect a lot of innovation in terms of different use cases and applications. Because I know we are all concerned with spectrum here and we manage spectrum, but from a business perspective, they are more looking at what applications can I utilize and how best what spectrum I could use. So we see a lot of that ecosystem evolving even further for private wireless networks and applications.
Yeah, thanks, Gautam. Sato-san, how about from Sony? What is the biggest challenge in your vision going forward?
Okay, first of all, I have a mention about first of the business point of view. Business point of view, I'd like to know how much PAL holder leasing to the secondary market. That we want to know. Otherwise, if PAL holder not leasing, we cannot using as a secondary license. So that's why that is one interesting point for the business point of view. For the technical point of view, one thing is currently we have only GA operation at 150 MHz band, but once PAL is start operating, how much busiest spectrum usage in the GAA. So that is one of the, so what kind of coexistence is needed. So currently we are working with the coexistence solution for the CXM, or currently we are defining in the OnGo, so the OnGo side, but I don't know it's working correctly or not. So that is only one of the challenges for the technical side.
Understood. Understood. Thank you, Sato-san. Masood, how about from Federated, the biggest challenge?
Yes. Yeah, thank you. I echo what especially our Google friend mentioned and other friends also repeated. I echo that. Definitely, that's a challenge. Normally when people talk about challenge, people look at the negative side. Well, I have a challenge from a positive side as well, and that is mainly the scaling. I mean, we expect that. The interest in CBRS has been significantly attractive and good, and we are hoping that, and we make sure that by increasing the scale of the number of CBSTs in the band, we make sure that very well that the scaling gets reflected into the SaaS implementation. Perhaps another challenge that I might want to talk, mainly one, both from a business and technical perspective, is the interaction and coexistence with other band. Perhaps that's another thing that for this year and the years to come, we need to look at that closely. But overall, I look at challenge mainly from a positive perspective.
Understood. Thanks, Masood. Mark, last word on the challenges before us.
Well, going last, I can say everything that everybody else said, but what everybody else didn't say was the Part 90 transition. So the Part 90 transition ends in less than 3 months, and right now that's the lion's share of devices that have been deployed is all them that are in the transition. So it seems to be going okay. There were some hitches initially, but I think those have gotten smoothed out. But there's a whole lot of transition got to go on before the deadline of October 17th, and then and that's roughly 1,000. I think it's 1,000 licenses that have to transition, and then the remainder transition over the next couple of years. So, if I were a WISP and looking at this, I'd be a little and had issues. I mean, the commission only gave them 6 months additional time, and they'd asked for 3 years. So, so I think trying to get that done is a big concern for them. So I'd say that, in addition to everything everybody else said, and I'll also say, Masood mentioned something that I don't think will be a big issue necessarily at the end of the year, but certainly shortly, and that's adjacent band issues like C-band. So, we're working that in all other fronts, but I would echo what everybody else said in addition to the transition, and that's it.
Well, very good. Well, for my next panel, guys, just so you know, since we'll be doing this virtually again, I'm going to have some crowd noise like they're doing at the baseball games here, so that when you guys are finished, I'll be able to give applause, and you have some feedback from the audience that way.
That means we can put cutouts of ourselves, is that right?
Cutouts of people behind me that are all watching as well. So I want to say thank you to our SaaS panel. This was as good as always. It's always interesting to get perspectives on these kinds of topics. I think our audience also finds it very useful to really hear from the heart and soul of what makes the shared spectrum work the SAS admins to get your guys' perspective on very important topics. So I'd like to extend my thanks, especially Sato-san. I know it's, depending on your point of view, it's either very late or very early. So you're certainly, you get an extra.
Yeah, I'm 3 a.m. right now. 3 a.m.
So Sato-san, you get an extra thank you, and greatly, we'll send you an extra shirt. So, well, thanks everybody. Well done as always, and we'll have a few more questions that we'll try to feed out to you guys as well. But well done as always. Thank you.
Thanks.
Good.
Bye.
Yep, thanks, Alan.
So let's
Yep, good job.
move on to our next session here.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
And ask everybody to mute their video. Good deal. So our next section, I'm going to turn over to Oren Binder, who is our marketing director, take us through some topics around marketing 2020 and beyond.
Okay, let's go to the next slide. Let's start. So really, if we look at what we're trying to achieve here in alliance marketing, the main goals that we're looking, again, to establish is, one would be, as you can see here, vertical industry awareness. I mean, we've been talking about CBRS for years now, but first, if you stop someone on the street, most people won't know what you're talking about. But more importantly, in this stage, enterprises are just starting to get into this and get more information and start to hear about this. So really establish the awareness and increase the awareness within the verticals that we identified, that we'll talk about in a second. In addition, we're looking to generate resources that will really add value to our membership around marketing their OnGo and CBRS solutions. And with all this, while we're doing it, we're also looking to grow the OnGo brand. Next slide. So really quick on the OnGo brand, I mean, it was touched before really well by Alan, and you saw also on the certification side that they are doing OnGo certifications. But really what we're trying to do here is promote the Alliance solutions and create a brand that's beyond just the acronym of CBRS, which is a specific band, but really kind of highlight all the work that's being done at the Alliance to bring a solution that you could walk into an enterprise or again, a fixed wireless solution on 3GPP, LTE, or 5G, and just know that it'll work. So really driving this kind of value proposition of simplicity, but also high value through the OnGo brand. And I could see, and I just made this a small icon you see here up, but I could see a time in the future where if we're thinking about neutral host, let's say, in a building, that there will be a sticker on the side of the building that says OnGo inside, and people will know what that means, that basically they can get, in the case of neutral host, good coverage without the throughout the building. Next slide. So we talked about the vertical industry awareness. So what we did last year, basically, we went and we identified, when you say industry, you say enterprises, there's endless like verticals, basically. So we identified the top 8 ones. And again, this was last year before a worldwide pandemic hit us. But still, we identified these verticals that we wanted to focus on initially, focus the efforts on. And once we identified it, we turned around and now started creating campaigns and collateral around them. So attending virtual events that are specific to these segments, generating our own Alliance webinars. So we had one on education, we had one on industrial this month. Next month, we have one on transportation hubs. So taking our subject matter experts from the Alliance, creating a value, like basically propositions specific to that vertical, and driving that through a webinar, adding one-pagers as kind of a handout to the webinar, and obviously beefing up the website with the content that's specific, because we know basically that when someone from a higher ed university or an industrial facility will want to look into this, he'll want to hear about his specific use cases and things that he cares about. So really trying to get specific horizontal depth here when we go into these specific verticals. And kind of the highlight and the crown jewel of something like that would be case studies. I'm a huge believer in case studies, especially in somewhat of a greenfield like this, where you're really educating the customer kind of from scratch. You're getting your own private LTE network. What does that mean? And all he cares about is really, like someone on the SASA basically panel mentioned, was how can that help me? So you can tell him you have your own spectrum, you have your own private LTE network. Really, it's what can it do for him? Why should he invest in this? And what's the added value? So if we talk about case studies, it's really leveraging what our members are doing and creating these case studies which define what challenges the user was facing, the customer was facing, obviously in what vertical it was, what was it trying to solve. OnGo came in with different components, different solutions, different vendors, and what was the results, and trying to get the specific metrics also on the results, kind of before and after. And obviously interviewing the customer as well, talking about how he was able to save money, do something quicker, or basically address a pain point that he wasn't able to address before. So again, that's something we're trying to work really hard on. We're just at the beginning, like you heard, Cat A's and some of these use cases are just getting off the ground. COVID kind of threw a curveball on that, but we are seeing a lot more on the education side and on other ones. Healthcare obviously is also popping up as well. So we should see some really compelling ones soon on those verticals. Next slide. So I talked about events. Obviously, no physical events this year. That also went away. We have plans to do different. We're really targeting less the kind of cross wireless events, but more getting to the verticals themselves, to the events that they go to the high-end events, in this case, connected commercial real estate. So connected real estate had an event last week in this case, and I'm just bringing this as an example, a kind of a recent example. We were a sponsor there. The main sponsor, we're able to work together with organizer to slot in, as you see here. There was something like, I think, 12 or 15 different sessions. And you can see, and this was a general commercial real estate, basically tech event, but we were able to insert a lot of CBRS in there and work together with the organizers to generate all these panels and again, slot in a lot of our members to speak in them and add value there and get the message out, get the awareness out there for this specific vertical. Next slide. So we talked about added value collateral for our membership, and this would be one main example that we're working on right now. So OnGo for Dummies will be coming out in a couple of months. It should be ready, something like 8 weeks from now, where we really are able to do a deep dive into OnGo and CBRS. So think about a 50-page book here, both physical and ebook, that you'd be able to hand over as a member, turn around and hand it over either internally, but mostly to customers who are looking for that next level. If you think of the funnel, they're beyond awareness. Now the IT manager really wants to get a deep dive on his own to understand what the components are, what this would look like, what a deployment would look like. So again, this would be an ebook that you would be able to turn around and hand over to that IT manager of the customer. And we're also enabling, we're branding this as OnGo, but we're enabling our members to co-brand this, put your own logo on it, on the cover, on the back, add some advertisement pages on the front and the back as well. That's something that a member will be able to do and basically make it his own. You wouldn't be able to alter the content. We're keeping that the content inside, but you will be able to make this ebook basically co-branded with your company, and again, deliver it that way. So either you can have the generic one, or work with the publisher to basically add your brand as well, and that's something we're happy again to provide. Next slide. So again, something we're looking to provide to the members is custom research, and this one will be exclusive only to the members. They'll be able to get 2 different researches. One is going to be on private networks, an overview of the current private LTE and future private 5G markets. We're asking analysts really to get into segmented TAMs per components, which obviously interest each one of you are interested kind of in a different section of it. Services, SaaS, CBSPs, and also get into the market opportunity, identify the key verticals, and try to kind of quantify the market opportunity there. That's something we've been hearing a lot from our membership, so we're really trying to provide them with a high-level report that would add value there. In addition, another one would be, again, a topic that's coming fast, hopefully, would be neutral hosts. So getting into that, we want the analysts to get into the different business models to try to put together an estimated timeline. And also, maybe most important, but in addition, to get some insights into the MNO plans here as well. So really put a report that will be able to give a good answer to the different options that are upcoming and enable us to turn around and create excitement in the market. Because again, personally, I think neutral hosts could be a killer app here with OnGo. And in this, and if we talk about what's next, and this kind of gives an insight into it. So obviously adding verticals, and things are changing with COVID, so we are being flexible with that. Like Google mentioned, education is turning into an opportunity here with remote learning. And if we think about commercial real estate, we heard different scenarios there where they're repopulating buildings in Manhattan now, and they have to put sensors in the lobby. They have to make sure there's only 4 people in the elevator. All these things that they don't necessarily want to do over, maybe do temperature checks in the entry. So again, different use cases that they're looking to CBRS as a possibility to address that. So again, beef up the verticals, expand the verticals to new ones that are coming up that will pop up, obviously. And also get into 5G. What would be the added value there? What use case could that address that might not have been able to be addressed with the LTE? And neutral host. We want to do a lot of promotion around that as well. Once we feel that it's close enough to get excitement there and buzz out in the market, 5 bars for everyone everywhere, and really start promoting that as well once we're confident that we could put a timeline behind it. Last slide. So again, for the members or the potential members, how you could get involved, it's really, we have a pretty good group that joins the bi-weekly marketing working group calls where we discuss all these things, where we are with the different projects. Business working group is always looking for subject matter experts, and that's where we tap into when I'm looking for speakers for different events, webinars, panels, etc., blogs. I go to BWG and get them from there. And case studies, again, we're looking to beef up, which is much high quality case studies that we can get our hands on. And I think it's a win-win in that the member basically can leverage our marketing power and our marketing campaigns and get his brand out there as well. That's all I have. Thanks.
Lauren, one question came in, wanted to get to you. When is the custom research, the research done by the external analyst, when are you expecting that to be able to be available to members?
So we're still locking that down, but we're looking at 4 to 6 weeks. We should be good.
Got it. Good deal. Thank you, sir. And thank you for the presentation.
Thanks.
So with that, we are wrapping up our session today. One thing I wanted to announce, I'm negligent to announce it at the beginning, we are using a new platform for our meeting this time, in addition to GoToWebinar and GoToMeeting. It's an umbrella application that is known as SwapCard. You should have received, as a member, you should have received an invite to join the SwapCard sessions. It has a complete agenda. It has access to chat rooms. It has access to the attendees so that you can set up one-on-one discussions. One of the things we were trying to do is recapture some of the in-person meeting feel. That's one of the big pieces of feedback we've gotten from my discussions with members about what's going on. So, you know, the thing that SwapCard will hopefully assist with is reconnecting us. So it's an experiment on our part. We think it has some merit. Please try it out. Give us some feedback on how we can improve it. There's some additional functionality that we'll add in over the coming, you know, meetings and sessions, etc. But at least we're trying to get some of that back for us. One question that was asked just a moment ago: where can we get these presentations? What will happen is after the 101, the recording of the session, the materials that were presented, as well as the questions, the text questions that we received, will be uploaded on the public-facing website, and we will send out an email to the attendees as to where they can go exactly to get that and download it. But it'll be on the public website, the CBRSalliance.org website. So you'll be able to look for that. Probably it'll take about 3 to 5 days to get that up there. Just there's a lot of materials that the admins are dealing with right now. So be a little bit patient. You know, it's all of that will be available for your use, of course, as well. With that, there are a couple of questions that came in that we didn't get to today that will take a little bit longer to answer. So we will include those in the responses. So don't worry if we didn't answer your questions, we will. It'll just be in a text form as opposed to here live with the audience. With that, I'd like to say thank you for attending today. Wish you all good health to you and your families. Stay safe. Really appreciate everyone joining us. We had almost 200 people today join us at one point during the call, and our registration for the members portions tomorrow are well over 200 as well. We're at 173 member companies, soon to be more. So things are looking really good from our perspective, and very appreciative of your attendance here. With that, I will say goodbye, and my thank you again, and have a good rest of your day. Bye now.